Author opinion of Dennis Keane at the History, Geography and Architecture, Culture and Life Matters of Kazakhs in the program Discovering Kazakhstan.
On today's program, History of Kazakhstani Science, Unique Soviet Architecture, Hidden Science Museums.
Salam, привет and hello. I'm Dennis Keane, and today on Discovering Kazakhstan, we will be discovering one of the most amazing buildings in the country, the Kazakhstan Academy of Science. The Academy of Science is like other national academies around the world, a place where state-funded research institutes carry out serious academic work. What's unique about Kazakhstan's academy is that it's housed in a stunning Stalinist-era building that's been called a temple to science. It looks in some ways like a palace from St. Petersburg, while having Central Asian arches and traditional patterns that give it a local touch. The best part is that it's open not just to scientists, but to the public as well, with parks you can wander, floors full of beautiful Soviet art, and a handful of small museums that welcome visitors. If you want to discover the Academy of Science on your own, then head to the leafy center of the former capital Almaty. Find this pleasant pedestrian pathway called Valikhanov Street and walk uphill till it reaches Shevchenko Street. There you'll find the grand entrance to the Academy. Right in the middle of the pathway, lined with spruces and firs, you will find a memorial to the street's namesake himself, Chokhan Valikhanov. Called the father of Kazakh ethnography, Valikhanov was one of the leading public intellectuals of Kazakhstan in the 19th century. Befriending such great minds as Fyodor Dostoevsky, he traveled around Kazakhstan recording Kazakh myths and stories and traditions for the very first time. All of this before dying at the young age of 29 of tuberculosis. Despite Valikhanov's tragic story, the small square near his statue has become a joyous place. The neighborhood is famous for housing academics, and their children and grandchildren come to play in the square every day. Locals used to nickname the square Chokhanka, and it was a popular place to meet friends and enjoy the fountains and fresh air. What makes the Academy of Science's location in Almaty feel so special is that it's surrounded on three sides by beautiful parks and squares, which in the springtime are blooming with beautiful tulips and lilacs. It's appropriate because it's said that Kazakhstan is the original birthplace of the tulip, and for a time, Almaty was the center of lilac cultivation in the world. In the park to the west of the Academy, you'll find a statue to another famous Kazakh ethnographer, Alkay Margulan. Margulan would go on to write books about topics as diverse as Kazakh eagle hunting and decorative arts. He's perhaps now best known as an archaeologist, having shown that Kazakhs once had great cities not just along the Silk Road, but also throughout the central region of Kazakhstan known as Sari Arka. To honor his dedication to glorifying Kazakhstan, this statue to Margulan was put up in January of 2008. In the park to the east of the Academy of Science, you'll find a statue of Alexander Pushkin, the king of Russian poetry, who at first glance might seem to have little to do with the Kazakhstan Academy of Science. But it's said that Pushkin came for several days to the Kazakhstani city of Uralsk, where he heard Kazakh poetry, a certain love story, and fell in love with the tale. He had it translated into Russian and introduced Kazakh arts to the European public. Meanwhile, Abay Kunanbayev, who might be said to be the Kazakh Pushkin, was a big fan of the Russian writer, and he would translate Pushkin texts into Kazakh, not only translating them but also setting them to music, playing his two-stringed dombra and singing Pushkin's words. As a symbol of this cultural exchange and friendship, they put a statue to Pushkin here in 2006, and at the same time put a statue to Abai in Moscow. The Eastern Park is better known not for Pushkin, but for this fantastic fountain known as the Eastern Calendar Fountain. Now, you may know the Chinese calendar with the year of the dog and the year of the horse and so on, but this is the Kazakh calendar. So, for example, instead of having a dragon, they have a snail. And instead of having a tiger, they have a snow leopard. If you look at the statues themselves, you see that they're created in a very interesting style. A lot of them have wings. A lot of them have their heads turned around. And some, like the snow leopard, have their feet folded up beneath them. This is an homage to an ancient style called animal style art that was created by Scythians, nomads who lived on the Eurasian steppe 3,000 years ago. The artist who designed the fountain, Vladimir Tverdoklebov, was given an amazing opportunity to decorate a whole new wing of the Academy of Science that was built in the early 1980s on the south side of the building. The new center was called the House of Scholars, and Tverdoklebov would work with other artists to fill it with what Soviets called monumental art: mosaics, murals, stained glass, and bas-relief sculptures. In addition to being a center of learning and research, this House of Scholars now has the biggest concentration of Soviet art in Almaty outside of the State Art Museum. For the first floor of the House of Scholars, Tverdoklebov and his team designed a series of 6 Roman-style mosaics. That means that the tiles are smaller, the detail is greater, depicting 6 famous figures from the history of Kazakh science, including our old friend Chokhan Valekhanov. In addition to a full-length portrait, you'll also see some attributes connected to their personality. In this case, a compass showing his travels and a scroll and book showing his literary activities. On the top floor of the House of Scholars, you'll find the most unusual place in the entire building, what's called the Winter Garden, a kind of indoor greenhouse where scientists could come to warm up during the cold winter months. It is here on the walls that you can find several bas-relief sculptures by the artist Mikhail Rapoport, showing scenes from traditional Kazakh life. But it's the stained glass outside the Winter Garden that will really take your breath away. Before I had seen this one, the only stained glass I'd ever seen was in churches, where the glass is thin and fragile, the detail is granular. Here, the glass is thick, colored, and textured, imported from Belarus by the artist Tverdoklebov, who depicts Scythian artifacts and scenes from the steppe. To find the oldest examples of monumental art in the Academy, head over to the older part of the building. Here, in the majestic concert hall, you will find ornamental plasterwork with tulips and hammers and sickles hidden inside. Up above, below the moldings, you'll find portraits of famous Kazakh and Russian scientists. And there, in the pendentives below the dome, you'll find socialist realist depictions of socialist workers from when this mural was painted in the 1950s. The ceiling mural is what's called a plafond, a style that uses foreshortened figures to create an optical illusion so that the Soviet workers appear to be standing above the hall and looking down on the audience. Present for any concert, yet not always noticed by the audience, are a group of metallurgists and veterinarians, farmers and pilots. A great place to start your exploration of the museums at the Academy of Science is at the Museum of the History of Kazakhstani Science, as here the exhibits cover the entire breadth of scholarly activities that have ever taken place in Kazakhstan. So if in the Museum of Archaeology or the Museum of Nature you can learn about archaeology and nature in Kazakhstan, here you can learn about how those archaeologists and natural scientists discovered what they discovered. There are 3 rooms in the museum, starting from the medieval ancient period of Kazakhstani science to the Soviet period, and then lastly, the modern day. Starting in the ancient period, it is often said that the father of all Kazakh science is a man named Al-Farabi. Before it was famously destroyed by the Mongols, Al-Farabi's hometown of Ochar was renowned as a center of learning in the Islamic world. With this brilliant diorama, we can imagine what it would have been like to be there during the town's heyday. The section of the museum concerning the Soviet period of Kazakhstani science begins, as it should, with Khanis Satpayev, a famous geologist who was the founding president of the Academy of Science. Satpayev had a title that we will find with many famous professors who once worked at the Academy. They were an academic, which meant that they had reached the pinnacle of their field. In a small exhibit like this one, we can see his medals and his discoveries, but Satpayev actually has an entire museum at the Academy dedicated to his life and work. Much of the museum consists of personal belongings that were donated by other academics, such as Ait Muhammad Abdulin, who donated this spiffy Soviet military costume, a huge chunk of white quartz, and my favorite, this small book created out of gemstones. Another brilliant academic of Soviet science was, of course, Alkay Margulan, whose statue we saw outside the Academy. Knowing what a domineering figure he was in his field makes it quite moving to see his personal possessions here behind glass. His own library card, the skull cap that Margulan would have once worn on his head, or even his field notebook. Now Margulan, when the Academy was founded, was a corresponding member, and along with a brilliant cohort of Kazakhstani scientists, they founded this academy. One of them was named Kangaspayev, and it was Kangaspayev who donated one of the most impressive items in the entire museum collection, this antique typewriter. Now what's unusual about the typewriter is the letters on the keys themselves. If you look, you'll see that the letters are written in Kazakh Cyrillic. Now that the Kazakh alphabet is shifting from Cyrillic to Latin, I think that one day this is going to be a priceless antique. The central exhibit in the museum is a detailed architectural model of the Academy of Science, a building that is recognizable to any Almatian, but that very few people have ever actually been in, especially in this museum, which was only opened in 2010. So I thought I would get on my social media and start a live video and bring some of my friends along and show them what we have going on here in the museum. Hi everybody out there. I am shooting Discovering Kazakhstan today at the Academy of Science, and I know that a lot of people in Almaty have not actually been in this beautiful building, but it is full of amazing museums, and we're inside the newest of all of them. It's called the Museum of the History of Science of Kazakhstan. But I thought that people out there, especially friends of mine who appreciate Soviet architecture, would love to see this model. Look how detailed that is. Every last little tree, every last window, everything is on there. And you can imagine that we are inside of this building, inside of this building. Kazakhstanis are fond of saying that their country is so vast and rich in mineral resources that it contains every element on the periodic table of elements. And if there's ever been a better physical illustration of this, it is this souvenir that was made in 1966 by an academic named Chokin. Here we can see 166 minerals all piled up into this funny little pyramid, topped on top by an eagle, and if you look inside, there's a little mountain goat that's hiding in there. But all along here you can see a list of them, and some of these minerals are quite rare, and the pyramid itself is a rarity on its own. It is one of only 3 of its kind in the entire country. In addition to earth sciences, Kazakhstani scientists in the Soviet Union were involved in more extraterrestrial affairs, studying astrophysics and space exploration. If there's any exhibit in this museum that has traveled the farthest to get here, it is this glass box here, containing Kazakhstani soil that was sent to space with a Kazakh cosmonaut. In the last room of the museum, Kazakhstani science marches forward into the independence era and the 21st century. Here you can see exhibits about modern-day linguistics and archaeology in Kazakhstan, but one exhibit that caught my eye concerns agricultural science. Here we can see a variety of grain called bayterek that has been considered to be one of the most productive grains ever produced, and it's here in a bundle that looks just like bayterek itself, the Independence Monument in Astana. Rich in Scythian artifacts, the Museum of Archaeology is perhaps the most visually captivating at the Academy of Science, and its talented English language guides can walk you through its treasures. One such guide is Yerbol. Yerbol, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I understand that the Archaeology Museum here is one of the oldest in the Academy.
Yeah, right. The Archaeology Museum is the oldest museum here. It was founded in 1973, and the artifact you can see here, was collected from 1943. So one of the famous findings is the Golden Man you can see here. He was from the Saka tribes, and now he became the symbol of the independence of the Kazakhstan. He calls Golden Man because his clothes was covered by gold pieces, and it was found more than 4,000 pieces of gold. And the weight only of the gold is more than 4,000 kilograms. And when the scientists made the analysis of bones, they had found that he was 17, 18 years old, young warrior, and probably he was the young king or the son of king. He was excavated in 1970 near the Issyk city. It's not far from Almaty, like 70, 80 kilometers from here. And for example, here you can see the picture of the building of the tomb.
So we can see many of these kurgans, these burial mounds around the city of Almaty, but when you see them nowadays, they look like these grassy hills. You would never think that underneath there is actually some kind of wooden construction. So how were they made?
Yes, most of the tombs has this construction from the woods, and they had built this construction and buried the king inside and covered by stones and different kinds of soils. Most of the tombs has this construction. For example, here you can see the model of the construction, but this one from another tomb.
Yerbal went on to show me the most striking exhibit of the museum, a reconstruction of the burial in Bedell, where a king and his queen were laid to rest with more than a dozen sacrificed horses. Even knowing that they're just recreations, seeing such beautiful animals dressed in such decadent horse tack laid down peacefully so that they may gallop in the afterlife is a stunning sight. Just as captivating is what's called the Gold Room, a new exhibit where you can see copies of the gold ornament close up. Here, the Scythian reverence for animals really comes through, as you can inspect the fantastic images of elks and snow leopards close up. When you talk to local Almatians about the Academy of Science, they always have fond memories of visiting the dinosaur skeletons at the Nature Museum here. And how can you not be impressed by skeletons such as these of the Tarbosaurus, who was dug up from the sands of the Gobi Desert? To imagine that monsters like this once roamed Kazakhstan is exactly the kind of awe-inducing realization that makes these paleontology exhibits so special. In about the same weight category as the Tarbosaurus is this giant mammoth skeleton, an animal that once lived in Siberia and North Kazakhstan not all that long ago, relatively speaking. It's actually a little touching to see how this giant mammoth skeleton has been tenderly posed to hover over what seems to be its youth, a copy of a young mammoth that researchers gave the sweet Russian nickname of Dima. Keeping the mammoth and her baby company is a giant rhinoceros with a neck long like a giraffe and a leg bone that is probably taller than most of the Kazakh kids who visit the museum. Historians believe that the horse was domesticated somewhere on the territory of modern-day Kazakhstan. It is no surprise then that this museum is rich in equine exhibits. Here, for example, we can see a timeline of how the horse evolved. 3 of the species that we can see here lived somewhere in Kazakhstan. The tridactyl horse Hipparion, for example, would have once galloped near what is now the town of Pavlodar in northeast Kazakhstan, where its remains were found along the right bank of the river Irtysh. As a language nerd and bookworm, one of my favorite corners of the Academy of Science is the Museum of Rare Books. The museum is organized in an unusual way because the Kazakh language has been written in so many different alphabets. So there's one separate room for ancient runes, another for Arabic calligraphy, and a whole other room for Latin. When foreigners learn about Kazakhstan, especially in English, they learn to spell Kazakh K-A-Z-A-K-H, but this is a transcription from Cyrillic. There was a time in the 1930s when Kazakh was written in Latin, in which case Kazakh was spelled Q-A-Z-A-Q. And here in the museum, we can actually find one of the original constitutions of Kazakhstan from the 1930s, where it is given this Q spelling. Now, what's fascinating is that now, decades later, this Latin alphabet is making a comeback. Starting this year, the Kazakh language will be moving from the Cyrillic alphabet to a new adapted Latin script. For people who are interested in writing systems, one of the most interesting exhibits that you can find here is a copy of the Colton Monument, which is a kind of Rosetta Stone that helps us understand the most ancient of Turkic alphabets, the Runic Alphabet. Nowadays, there are only a few archaeologists in Kazakhstan who are able to read these letters, but for those who can, it reveals a whole world of the ancient ancestors of Kazakh people. In the west wing of the Academy, you can find the Central Scientific Library, a place where I have long had my own library card. I love to come here to look through the thousands of books about Kazakhstan. They have a digital database that you can look through, but I rather nostalgically prefer to look through the cabinets that line the walls. Unlike in the libraries of my childhood back home in America, where you can wander through the stacks at will, the books in Kazakhstani libraries are under lock and key. But for good reason, because there are some true rarities here. What you need to do is take a slip of paper, fill out your name, your library card, and the book you're looking for, and a library assistant will descend into the basement to look for whatever you need. The librarians have found us the oldest books that they have in this collection, and they date back to the turn of the century. Here's one from 1892. Now, leafing through these pages, it's actually even hard for me to read, though I know Russian, because some of the letters that they have in the Cyrillic alphabet are so old they don't even exist anymore. So these are serious treasures. But turning every page from a century-old book, there's that special scent of history and knowledge. While the librarian fetches your books, you get to enjoy the most beautiful reading room in all of Kazakhstan, with its antique chandeliers and beautiful moldings covered in Kazakh ornament. I can spend hours here getting delivery after delivery of old books, and the best part is it's a public resource, so the whole experience doesn't cost a cent. With its parks, art, and museums, Almaty's Academy of Science is an unforgettable destination. But if there's any place here at the Academy that you will remember forever, it is the lobby. Built to look like a giant yurt, it has a domed ceiling that produces some unreal acoustics. Echo! Well, that's all, folks. Until next time, thanks for joining us on Discovering Kazakhstan. Sağ ol, пока, and goodbye.